A lot of people are calling this format a triangle format, where Yummy is supposed to be Vanquish Soul Canine, Vanquish Soul Canine is supposed to be Dracotail, and Dracotail is supposed to be Yummy. While in theory a lot of that is true, there are a lot of nuances to the format that people are kind of glossing over. For example, out of the 3 decks, Dracotail was expected to be the worst, and then it kind of caught people by surprise by being much better than it was considered to be. For example, the spell cards are extremely powerful and they break boards like no other cards in the game. However, the deck has a glaring issue that's keeping it from being one of the best decks in the format. Its end board is way too fair and it loses to way too many hand traps. On the positive side, the deck can be played in like a million different ways. Right now, it seems like the most competitively successful version of the deck is Pure, where you just play the Dracotail engine with a bunch of hand traps, and sometimes including Shaddoll cards or Cartesia, for example, and King of the Swamp. So I want to talk about a few of those choices and why none of those actually solve the issue with the deck. So for example, the deck loses to hand traps, but more specifically, the silver bullet for this deck is Retaliating Sea. The deck is not good under Macrocosmos effects because you only get value out of the monsters that you fuse with if they go to the graveyard. So once they're banished, the only way to put them back in the deck is with the trap cards. Imperm Veiler on Arthalion is a huge choke point for the deck. The deck plays a card advantage battle with your opponent. You need the Arthalion to resolve to add back more cards from your graveyard. If that gets interacted with and you're left with 1 card, you're pretty much guaranteed to lose on the spot. If they Ash your Katu, that feels incredibly bad when you go second, and it makes things way more difficult. So how do cards like Cartesia, King of the Swamp, Edgem Chain, the Shaddoll cards, Primite cards, Magistus cards fix this issue with the deck? Every solution is fake, or it just feels incredibly bad. For example, you're changing your normal summon from Lucius to Cartesia. You get to play around Retaliating Sea, sure. However, the spells are starters, and because even Katu when you go first includes an effective special summon, they can just give you the Retaliating Sea right there, and then you're kind of cooked. Normal summoning a card that says it should special summon itself for free in the deck that it's meant to be played in feels incredibly bad, and you're very limited with extenders in the deck. A lot of the hand traps you can't really fuse with if you don't have another Dracotail name. You also have the Edgem package, which like is really good value. However, they're fiends, so you can't actually use them for the limited card pool in the extra deck that you can make in this deck. It feels incredibly bad. In addition to that, the other cards that are being played in the deck, like the Shaddolls and the King of the Swamp and Fenrir and stuff like that, they're not actually like real pushes for the most part. The King of the Swamp still plays into Retaliating Sea. Obviously, Poly into Guardian Chimera I think is actually one of the better interruptions the deck can make, because one, it's non-target pop, which is pretty good against Yummy, and also it draws you cards, which is really important in the deck that you get your hand advantage back. However, that being said, you need to keep cards in your hand to play the game with this deck, which is why like the deck's structure kind of conflicts with itself, because you're incentivized to play monster interruptions as hand traps, and yet you have to deplete your hand resources, which is integral to the strategy. Cartesia is a good card for this, as well as Primite Ether Barrel, because those cards add themselves back. Ether Barrel is like a little bit worse because you have to wait to your own standby phase, but the problem with that I see is that for those effects to resolve in this deck, you have to already be playing the game to a point where like you're probably just winning. So they're also just more normal summons. They're not like genuine pushes. Ending on Seal's Pass now is like fine, but it's also just like not great. If you look at the Yummy end board, it's still better than the Dracotail end board, and they're like less interactable with. Like we're setting 2 traps. They have Ash, potentially Bell, they have Purge, they have Imperm, they have answers to a lot of your cards. It feels really like an uphill battle to play against decks with a lot of non-engine space like that. When you just get like hand trap, it feels incredibly bad, which can be said about a lot of the decks in the format. I think it's just super true for Dracotail because it's felt like you're not really incentivized to go first post side. A lot of the time I felt like just playing the going second version would just be better for the deck, because your spell cards are insane at breaking boards, and in that scenario where you're going second, I think a lot of the cards that people are choosing to play in their deck make more sense. The Shaddoll cards make more sense, King of the Swamp makes more sense. I think all that being said, Dracotail is still a really good deck. However, I don't think those cards fix the issue with the deck, which leads me to the cards that I think fix most of the issues with the deck. The Branded Dracotail deck is a bunch of good cards, and Branded Fusion is genuinely the only way to bridge one engine to the Dracotail engine. The Despia cards and the Branded cards are actually fairly good under Deified effects, so you're not super concerned about Herald. The deck is way better at going first. If you want to play like the Edo lock or the Puppet lock, whatever you want to call it, you can, but you don't technically have to. You can just play a bunch of good cards in your extra deck. You have like much more follow-up. If you're playing cards like Fusion Deployment and you already have Dracotail stuff, you can summon the Cartesia for free, and then your Arthalion's protected under Imperm. The deck has probably the best synergy out of any of the other variants, but that deck has like one huge glaring weakness. Paradise Smasher exists at the moment, and basically you're playing a deck with no hand traps. If your opponent sees you have a deck with no hand trap, they can go, here's my Paradise Smasher, you lose on the spot. Over a long tournament, I don't think it's a smart decision to play that deck because you're going to see Vanquish Soul Canine, but I think that the Branded version solves a lot of the issues with the deck compared to any of the other ones. hand, and that's why I'm not convinced you can play a deck without any hand traps in this format at the moment, and it's probably going to be that way for a long time. The one last point I wanted to make about this deck is that you can do like fairly unfair things with it. You can just turn 0 window your opponent. Sometimes it feels really broken, and other times it's like very clearly not the correct decision to do, and Winda is like a fairly outable card, as well as Dragoon being a fairly outable card. If I'm ever 5-manaing on turn 0, I'm pretty much always making Arthalion despite having Shaddoll Beast in my hand or not, because you just get so much more value that way than doing Winda. With all that being said, Dracotail is still one of my favorite decks of the format. I still have the cards, I love to play it, but in terms of bringing it to a tournament and like wanting to succeed with it, I think it's a pretty bad decision. You're pretty much guaranteed to just get hand trapped out of the game, and when you go first, half your end board loses to hand traps anyway, so the hand traps they draw for turn are still going to be good against you. I don't think that there's really any incentive to play this deck if you look at it from a competitive standpoint at the moment. The only advantage I see is that all the cards are extremely high quality, but like I said, it loses to way too much in my opinion, and I don't think there's a genuine solution to this deck. The only way that this deck gets better is the third wave of support, if we get it, has to address these issues with the deck. So considering the second wave of support was like fairly mid, I'm not super optimistic about the third wave if we get it. By comparison, if we look at the cards that were revealed for K9 and Yummy, they are leagues better for their strategies than the Dracotail cards that we got. That's all I have to say on Dracotail for now. I hope to see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. I'll see ya.